Wagana harates, negayas tuaskene, wakachineti gana gitre, disne wakachinetiat hana ganet tuitre neque. Dani giate, chup nagegisiseta, scarure di wagafnutne, the gatgut nigu at gines scarure ganis has no wagaraque. Welcome, I hope that you are at peace. I am glad to be here and I'm happy that you are here also. Donnie is my name, Beaver is my clan, Tuscarora is my nation. I come from the Tuscarora Nation, Drowner Creek Longhouse. Today I'd like to discuss recognition without consultation, the Tuscarora Nation of North Carolina and the Lumbee Rider. I want to talk about something that will shape Native life in North Carolina for generations. The Lumbee Fairness Rider that became law through the most recent National Defense Spending Authorization Act. This wasn't a standalone debate. It's a policy rider attached to a must-pass federal defense bill. What I want to focus on is not symbolism, not politics, not celebration narratives, but impact. Because decisions were made that directly affect Indigenous people in North Carolina without consulting all the Indigenous people who live there. And one of those nations is the Tuscarora Nation of North Carolina. This is not about attacking anyone's humanity. This is about consultation, representation, resources, sovereignty, and unfulfilled obligations. The Lumbee Fairness Rider defines the Federal Service region that includes Robeson, Cumberland, Hoke, and Scotland counties. Tuscarora people live in this same region. The Tuscarora Nation of North Carolina was not consulted on how Tuscarora people live in this region will be treated, how representation will work, how resources will be allocated, or how federal agencies will distinguish between sovereign native governments. That's the central problem. Recognition without consultation creates structural harm, discrimination, prejudice, and oftentimes erasure. Who is the Tuscarora? The Tuscarora Nation of North Carolina is a sovereign indigenous people, original people, Egwehamwe, whose presence on Turtle Island predates European arrival by millennia. Before colonial interference, the Tuscarora were one of the strongest political and military powerhouses in the Carolina interior. We controlled trade routes, resources, and regional diplomacy. By the mid-1600s, Tuscarora communities controlled access to European trade goods. The Tuscarora language functioned as a trade language across the entire region. Before the Tuscarora Wars, relations with the English often involved periods of peace and trade, guided by principles consistent with the two-row wampum: cohabitation, non-interference, as two vessels traveling across the same river. That peace didn't collapse because of tribal conflict. It collapsed because of settler occupation without consent, trafficking of Tuscarora women and children, destruction of Tuscarora food systems, and restriction of Tuscarora economic life. It's important to remember that trafficking did not only target Tuscarora women and children. Tuscarora men were trafficked as well. This history is documented in the diplomatic record, including one of the 8 wampum belts sent to Conestoga, which specifically records the violence and displacement. In the wars, many Tuscarora sought shelter under the Haudenosaunee Confederacy between 1712 and 1802, but not all left. Tuscarora families remained in the southern homelands. Continuity never disappeared. The treaties that follow were not equal agreements between sovereigns. They were produced in conditions of coercion and duress under the collapse of original peace laws. They weakened Tuscarora sovereignty and constrained political life and diplomacy. Here's a couple of core principles people must understand. The Tuscarora did not consult to selling the land. Because our governance is based on protecting future generations, the mother, our homelands, and creation itself cannot be forfeited for any type of monies, conveniences, or privileges for any one single Tuscarora or the collective. Agreements extracted under pressure from representatives without full authority are not free, informed, and consensual. Tuscarora families later resettled along Drowning Creek and were never properly empowered to defend our land claims or pursue reconciliation for treaty violations. The Tuscaroras were disenfranchised in the 1830s as Indian removal was taking place. So as Tuscaroras attempted to reconcile these grievances, state and federal doctrines of Indian removal, discrimination, and erasure did not attend to those grievances. Tuscarora people were attacked and drawn into settler conflict during the Civil War without protection or compensation, leading to resistance movements that history later distorted into sensational folklore, more famously known as the Lowry War. Then came assimilation policy, the Croatan Act, the Croatan Indian Normal School, state-designed systems meant to reshape identity and governance into compliance. These were not Tuscarora law. They were state control. Some descendants later accepted the Lumbee designation through shifting state policies and assimilation frameworks. The Tuscarora Nation of North Carolina did not disappear. It remained politically and culturally active and demonstrates continuity to this day. In the 1930s, 22 Tuscaroras were enrolled under the Indian Reorganization Act, showing federal recognition of political continuity and intent to reorganize. Briefly, for context, the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934 was presented as reform, but it imposed U.S.-style governance systems on Native nations, offering federal support only if tribes adopted American constitutional structures and council models. For many Native nations, including the Tuscarora Nation of North Carolina, this disrupted traditional governance, leadership selection, and community organization systems that were based on kinship, consensus, and cultural law. As Vine Deloria Jr. later explained, these structures often replaced indigenous political systems with standardized Western models that viewed communities as administrative districts rather than living nations. This erosion of traditional governance frameworks occurred before the Lumbee Act and shaped how federal policy engaged indigenous nations in North Carolina, especially in ways that weakened sovereignty rather than strengthening it. This is part of the broader pattern of federal tribal relations where policy is framed as protection or reform while structurally reorganizing indigenous governance and authority. The Tuscaroras sued the federal government in 1975 and won a judgment confirming that the Lumbee Act had not in fact terminated the federal responsibility to Tuscaroras as was promoted during that day. Yet the federal government still refuses to accept Tuscarora reorganization, land into trust, or full constitutional recognition, even while acknowledging our existence and engaging in limited services. That's not accidental. That's structural exclusion. Now fast forward to today. The federal government just created a new recognition framework and service region in southeastern North Carolina without consulting the Tuscarora Nation of North Carolina. This creates real risks: misrepresentation, administrative absorption, loss of political voice, diversion of resources, and erasure through administrative bureaucracy. When agencies show up to consult the tribe in the region, who do they mean? When services are distributed, whose governance structure is recognized? When cultural and archaeological claims arise, whose authority is honored? This isn't symbolic. It's operational power. We've seen this before in places like Oklahoma, where the Cherokee Nation and the United Kituwa Band share geography, but remain separate sovereign governments. Shared land does not equal shared governance. Under the two-row wampum, even if the state and federal governments establish relationships with other tribes, they still have unmet obligations to the Tuscarora people. Two vessels, same river, no steering, no interference. And under the General Goa, the great path of peace. The Tuscarora Nation has the right to exist without fear of assimilation, removal for noncompliance, taxation without representation, or institutional interference. In 1710, our ancestors sent wampum seeking permission to live in peace, asking for safety for our women, children, elders, and families from the Pennsylvania colony. Freedom from slavery, freedom from death, freedom from fear. What we are asking for today is the same law in modern language: peace, consultation, protection, and non-interference. So the question isn't whether recognition is good. The question is whether recognition can exist without erasing others. Because justice doesn't mean building one future on top of another people's erasure. If you care about indigenous rights, if you care about the original peoples, the Tuscarora, then where is the consultation with the Tuscarora Nation people? How will Tuscarora representation and sovereignty be protected? How will sovereignty be respected in shared regions? Because forgetting the Tuscarora story is not historical amnesia. It's modern erasure. And we're not done asking questions. Prior, free, informed consent. You do not have it. Go back to the drawing table. Polish the silver. Refreshen the obligations. Renew your responsibilities. We are not going away. Neither are your obligations. Yahweh for your time, patience, and consideration. Yahweh oi. Disney wagwa shitate.